The unexpected arrival in the vast emptiness of space, where silence stretched across the galaxies. The aliens had long claimed the stars as their own. For centuries, they ruled the outer worlds, expanding their territories and defeating any force that dared to challenge them. The galaxy was theirs, till one day a sudden anomaly appeared, something no one could explain, something they never saw coming. It started as a faint blip on their radar, a tiny dot in the distance, easily dismissed. But when the blip began to grow, their curiosity shifted to concern. The unknown object had entered one of the most heavily guarded sectors in the Galaxian area, long considered off-limits to all species, even the most powerful. For generations, no one dared to approach this forbidden space. It was a dead zone, a graveyard of ancient ships and long-lost civilizations. The alien fleet, stationed in the vicinity, immediately went on high alert. Their sensors flared with activity, and their weapons systems were activated, but no one could explain what they were seeing. The object was unlike anything they had ever encountered. It wasn't a typical ship. Its shape was unfamiliar, its energy readings impossible to match. No species, not even the most ancient ones, had ever designed such a vessel. "What is it?" whispered Captain Zurich, his voice trembling as he stared at the readouts. He was the commander of the Vithrax fleet, one of the most feared military forces in the galaxy. For years, the Vithrax had prided themselves on their technological superiority, but nothing in their arsenal could explain what was before them. The ship, a sleek, dark mass against the backdrop of the void, seemed to defy the laws of physics. It was moving toward them at an unhurried pace, as if it had all the time in the universe, and it showed no signs of slowing down. The Vithrax were used to powerful, menacing ships. They had faced countless enemies, but this was something new, something powerful. A series of transmissions went out, demanding answers. "Unknown ship, you are entering restricted space," the fleet's communication officer called out, his voice shaking. "Identify yourself immediately." There was no response. Zurich turned to his officers. "Send a second transmission. Order them to halt their approach and identify themselves. If they do not respond, we will engage." Seconds felt like hours. The silence was deafening. Then, suddenly, the mysterious ship responded, but not in the way anyone had expected. A strange signal emitted from the ship, sharp and clear, but the meaning was indecipherable. The aliens tried to decode it, but nothing matched their language. It was a sequence of pulses, each one growing more urgent, yet still incomprehensible. "Captain, we can't make sense of it. It's like nothing we've ever seen," the communication officer said, his face pale. "There's no known civilization that uses this kind of signal." Zurich's mind raced. His fleet had encountered countless species over the years, each with its own language and technology. But this was different. Something felt wrong. The ship, though silent, emanated a sense of raw, untapped power. It wasn't just a ship, it was a message, a warning, and Zurich could feel it deep within his bones. "We can't allow it to enter our space." "Not without understanding what it is," Zurich muttered, his eyes narrowing. "Prepare for combat. We'll show them who rules this galaxy." The alien fleet ships began to move into formation, surrounding the mysterious warship. Each one was heavily armed, ready to strike at the first sign of hostility. The Vithrax had learned the hard way that the unknown could be dangerous, and they didn't intend to take any chances. They had the power, they had the numbers, they had to fire at will, Zurich ordered, his voice cold and commanding. A barrage of laser beams and energy missiles shot forward, lighting up the darkness of space. The crew of the Vithrax watched in disbelief as the blasts hurtled toward the mysterious ship, only to have them vanish before they made contact. The weapons hit an invisible shield, sending shockwaves throughout the battlefield. For a moment, the Vithrax were left stunned. How could anything withstand their firepower without a scratch? Before anyone could react, the ship fired back. A single concentrated energy beam shot out, faster than anything the Vithrax had ever seen. It tore through the darkness and struck one of the Vithrax warships, disabling its weapon systems in an instant. The ship exploded in a flash of light, disintegrating in the blink of an eye. The Vithrax were stunned. Their weapons had done nothing. Their best ship had been destroyed in seconds. "Report," Zorik demanded, his voice rising. The communication officer scrambled to provide information. "Shields are down on several ships. We're not even making a dent in their defenses." Zarik's mind raced. Who or what could wield such power? This was no ordinary ship, no ordinary species. What were they dealing with? And more importantly, why had they come here? "Initiate full retreat," Zorik shouted, his voice now filled with urgency. "This isn't a battle we can win. Not yet." But as the Vithrax began to turn their ships, preparing to retreat and regroup, the mysterious warship moved closer, its silent engines sending shockwaves through the void. It wasn't just a ship, it was a statement. It was a challenge. Zorik knew that this was no ordinary enemy. This was a force that could change the galaxy. And now, the aliens had no choice but to face it head-on. The question was who was behind the ship, and what did they want with the forbidden space? As the alien fleet retreated, the mysterious warship continued its slow, deliberate advance. The tension in space was palpable, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The silent worshippers. The alien fleet scrambled to retreat. Their pride and fear were ignited. The mysterious human warship, having effortlessly disabled their best ship, continued to advance without hesitation. The quiet hum of its engines filled the cold, dark expanse of space, yet it held an eerie sense of control, as if the very ship itself was alive, watching, waiting. The Vithrax fleet was shaken, their once invincible superiority shattered in a matter of moments. Captain Zorik paced nervously on the bridge of his flagship, Varkath, his mind racing to find an explanation for what he had just witnessed. His officers, once calm and collected, were now visibly rattled, their faces pale, as they watched the warship's movements. "Status report," Zorik barked, his voice edged with urgency. "All ships are still operational, Captain," came the response from his chief tactical officer. "But we've lost one of our best cruisers. We didn't even come close to damaging it." Zorik slammed his fist against the control panel. This wasn't just an attack, it was a humiliation. For the first time in his career, the great Vithrax fleet was exposed as weak, vulnerable. The Vithrax had long ruled this galaxy, their power unrivaled. And now, this lone ship, with unknown origins, had completely neutralized them. "Initiate communication with the Central Command," Zorik ordered, his voice trembling with restrained anger. "We need reinforcements. This human ship isn't from any known race. We must understand its capabilities." As the communication lines flickered to life, Zarik's mind couldn't help but linger on the silence of the ship, the unnerving stillness. It had given no warning before unleashing its devastating power, and now it was simply advancing, unmoving, as if it were a predator closing in on its prey, calmly awaiting its moment to strike. Meanwhile, aboard the mysterious warship, things were far from silent. Inside its sleek, dark corridors, lights flickered on as the crew, unseen by the aliens, moved with practiced precision. Every action, every command, seemed calculated, as if this was all part of a plan. Yet, there was something deeply unsettling about it. It wasn't just a warship, it was a symbol of a humanity that had once thrived among the stars. Now long forgotten, but never fully gone. Captain Juno Walker stood at the helm, looking out at the alien fleet, her expression cold and unyielding. She wasn't afraid. This was what they had trained for. The mission was simple: reach forbidden space, make the galaxy remember what humanity had once been, and show them that Earth was far from forgotten. "We're on track," Juno muttered, almost to herself, "just as planned." Her voice was steady, but there was an underlying sense of something greater, purpose that had been passed down through generations of humanity's most resilient survivors. They had been preparing for this moment, hidden away on Earth and across its colonies for centuries. The warship was their signal, their promise to the universe that humanity wasn't finished yet. And now, with their first step onto the galactic stage, they were making their presence known. The ship's AI Eris hummed softly beside her. "Captain, the Vithrax fleet is regrouping. They are attempting to send reinforcements from a nearby system." Juno's lips curled into a faint smile. "Let them, they can try. But they've already underestimated us." Eris responded with a calculated tone. "The energy reserve is at 85%, Captain. Our remaining power is sufficient for another few strikes. However, the time to negotiate or strategize is quickly running out." Juno glanced at the tactical display where the alien fleet had begun to move toward their backup positions, slowly retreating. They weren't coming back in force, at least, not yet. Their response, while powerful, had been disorganized. It was clear that they had no idea what they were truly dealing with. "Very well," Juno said. "Let them regroup. We'll give them a reason to reconsider this domain they think they control." Back in the command room of the Vithrax fleet, Zarek was already preparing for their next move. His crew was working rapidly, calculating their course of action, trying to piece together what little information they had about the human warship. "Captain, we've intercepted more communications from the unknown ship," the communications officer said hesitantly. "It's repeating that strange signal, almost as though it's calling for something, but we don't know what." Brow furrowed. Why would they send a message if they're not interested in negotiation? Are they taunting us? The officer paused, then answered in a nervous tone. "It's not a taunt, Captain. It feels like a message to the galaxy. Something bigger than just this skirmish." Zarek's anger rose. "They're trying to make us look weak," he growled. "This is a declaration, not just a fight. They're proving something we can't understand. Prepare to launch a full assault, all ships. This time, we crush them, or we burn everything they hold dear." Back on the human warship, Juno's eyes narrowed as she observed the alien fleet's movements. The tactical readout showed that they were regrouping, but not quite attacking yet. Something was off. Were they trying to bait her into a trap? Captain Eris interrupted her thoughts. "A Vithrax flagship is approaching with full force. They're making a direct course toward us. Their leader, Zarek, has personally commanded the assault." Juno felt her pulse quicken. Zarek was no ordinary commander. He was known for his ruthlessness. This would be their real test. But humanity had always overcome greater odds. She stood, her voice cutting through the command deck. Ready all systems. We've come too far to back down now. Prepare for the real battle. As the alien flagship approached, the warship powered up, its weapons systems humming to life. But this time, there was no hesitation. There was no fear. Just a clear, determined strike at the heart of the galaxy's greatest oppressors. The true battle was about to begin. The humans were no longer hiding in the shadows. They were here to fight for their future, and the galaxy would soon know the price of underestimating Earth. The first contactor. Silence in space was broken only by the hum of the human warship systems. The cold, vast expanse outside the ship's hull seemed to stretch forever. Inside, the atmosphere was tense as Captain Juno Walker stood at the helm, staring at the tactical readout in front of her. The Vithrax flagship was closing in fast. Its massive form loomed ahead like a beast ready to strike. But Juno wasn't intimidated. She had prepared for this moment for centuries. Captain Iris, the ship's AI, spoke in a calm, collected voice. The Vithrax flagship is within range. All weapon systems are ready for engagement. Should I activate? Juno didn't respond immediately. Her fingers hovered over the control panel, but something made her pause. She wasn't afraid of battle. That was not what had her thinking. It was the thought that this was no ordinary warship. This was not just a show of force. What the Vithrax didn't know was that this was a messenger test, and humanity was sending it loud and clear. "We'll do this our way," Juno said, her voice steady. "We don't start with firepower. We start with a message. Let them know what they're up against." Back in the Vithrax fleet's command center, Captain Zarek watched the ship's movements on his screen. The human warship had positioned itself in the heart of their path. The ships moved around it like sharks, circling their prey. This was at the moment of reckoning. They would not allow some mysterious force to waltz into their galaxy without showing them the consequences. "All ships, position yourselves for full engagement," Zarek barked, his voice hard as steel. "Prepare to fire as soon as we close the distance." The Vithrax warships began to close the gap, their engines roaring with power, their weapons ready to unleash the fury they had long been known for. But something felt different this time. Something was off. The human ship didn't act like any opponent they'd ever faced. It was too calm, too still. On board the human warship, Juno had been watching the Vithrax ships move closer, but she didn't feel any sense of fear. She felt anticipation. This was the moment she had waited for. Humanity was about to make its return. The warship, designed with the pinnacle of human ingenuity, remained silent as the Vithrax approached. The crew was ready, but their captain had a plan. They wouldn't just defeat these invaders, they would make them understand something profound. "Open a channel to the Vithrax fleet," Juno ordered. The communications officer hesitated for a moment. "Captain, are you sure? This could provoke them further." Juno nodded firmly. "This isn't just about defeating them. It's about making them understand that we are not here to be ruled. Open the channel. Let them hear what we have to say." The officer complied, and the communication screen flickered to life. For the first time, a direct link to the Vithrax fleet was established. Zarek's face appeared on the screen, his expression cold and demanding. "Human warship, you have entered our space without permission. Identify yourselves, or we will destroy you." Zarek's voice was deep and powerful, but it carried an edge of fear that wasn't lost on Juno. She stood tall in her command chair, her voice calm but unwavering as she spoke. "We are humanity, and we've returned." Zarek's eyes narrowed. and he leaned forward in his chair. Humanity. You speak of a race that was wiped from the galaxy centuries ago. You're nothing but a ghost-an ancient myth. Juno met his gaze, her eyes full of quiet strength. We were lost, yes, but we are not gone. We have returned to take back what was once ours. You have no right to control this galaxy. We will not stand by as you continue your reign of terror. There was a long silence. Zarek opened his mouth to respond, but Juno cut him off, her voice now firm with authority. We do not seek your submission, we seek equality. We will not live under your rule, and we will not allow you to dominate any more lives. You have been warned. The transmission cut out abruptly, and the tension on the bridge was palpable. The Vithraks had just received their first message from humanity. It wasn't a war cry, it wasn't a threat, it was a declaration. Zarek sat in stunned silence on the bridge of his ship. For the first time in his career, he felt unsure. The human message was clear. They were no longer prey, no longer a forgotten species. They were a force to be reckoned with. Captain, one of his officers said cautiously, their weapons are powered up. They're preparing for something, but they're not firing. What are they doing? Zarek clenched his fists. They want us to come to them. They want to show us they're stronger than we think. But they'll learn the hard way. He barked his orders again. All ships open fire on their warship. They will bow to us, or we will show them why we rule this galaxy. Back on the human warship, Juno stood calmly in the command center, watching the screen as the Vithrak ships moved into position. They were preparing to launch their attack, but Juno wasn't about to make the first move. This wasn't just about firepower, it was about the message. The warship's systems hummed to life as her crew braced themselves. Prepare to engage, Juno ordered, her voice unwavering. But we will strike on our terms, not theirs. As the Vithrak's fleet began to fire, the human warship's shields flared to life, absorbing the incoming energy with ease. The Vithraks had underestimated the technology of this ship, just as they had underestimated humanity itself. With a swift motion, Juno gave the order, return fire, show them who they're up against. The human warship's weapons unleashed with deadly precision, striking the alien ships with a force that sent shockwaves through the void. The Vithrak's fleet recoiled as their ships were torn apart by the power of humanity's return. But it wasn't just the weapons that struck fear into the hearts of the aliens, it was the realization that humanity, in its silent defiance, had become a force unlike any they had ever faced before. The truth revealed as the Vithrak's fleet reeled from the shock of their first encounter with the human warship. Their commanders scrambled to regain control. Their once unshakable confidence had been shattered by the sudden and devastating power of the human ship. The galaxy, which had long believed humanity to be nothing more than a myth, was now facing a threat that none of the alien empires had anticipated. Back on the human warship, Captain Juno Walker stood at the helm, her gaze focused on the tactical display. The alien fleet was scattered, their attacks ineffective against the advanced technology of her ship. But Juno knew this victory was just a small part of a much larger mission. The Vithraks might have been the first to face humanity's wrath, but they wouldn't be the last. The warship had a purpose far beyond mere retaliation. It was a symbol of humanity's return, a return that would change the galaxy forever. Captain, the communications officer spoke, his voice filled with urgency. We've intercepted a transmission from an unknown source. It's coming from deep within the restricted zone. Juno's eyes narrowed, Put it through, she ordered. The screen flickered to life, and the image of an alien commander appeared. This was no Vithrax or Kratha leader, this was someone new. Someone who had yet to reveal their true intentions. The alien's appearance was unlike anything Juno had seen before at all. With luminous eyes and skin that seemed to shimmer like the stars themselves. Human, the alien said, their voice resonating, with an eerie calm. I am Commander Zalrith of the Ascendants. I've been watching your ship's movements. You have breached a territory far beyond your understanding. But your strength is undeniable. I wish to speak with you. Juno stood motionless, her heart racing. The Ascendants were a race of beings thought to be even older than the Vithrax. They were known as ghost-like figures in the galaxy, living in the shadows and watching the rise and fall of empires. To hear from them now, after all this time, was more than unexpected, was ominous. Who are you, and what is your purpose? Juno asked, her voice steady despite the tension rising within her. Zalrith's eyes glowed faintly as they spoke. We are not your enemies, human. In fact, we are not your allies either. We are something more. We have watched your species for millennia, and we know your history. Your ancestors were a force to be reckoned with, but you disappeared for so long that even the stars forgot you. Juno's thoughts raced. You've been watching us all this time. Zalrith nodded slowly. Yes, we have. Your legacy, your rise and fall, it was all foretold. But you are not alone in this galaxy. There are others who have been watching, waiting for the right time to either destroy you or use you for their own purposes. You are not the only forgotten race to return. You are, however, the first to reveal your strength so publicly. Juno stood silent, absorbing the weight of Zalrith's words. The truth was becoming clearer. The human warship was no accident, it was part of a larger plan, a plan that had been set into motion long before humanity's return. And yet, despite everything they had learned, the Vithrax and other alien races had underestimated humanity's capacity to strike back. We've come to reclaim what was once ours, Juno said, her voice growing firm. We don't seek to be anyone's tool. We seek freedom, and we will fight for it. Zalrith's expression softened, almost as if they were amused by the human captain's response. You are brave, Captain Walker. But bravery alone will not protect you from what is to come. The galaxy is full of ancient powers that cannot be defeated by a single ship, no matter how strong it may seem. Juno met Zalrith's gaze. We'll find a way. We always have. The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving Juno standing in the center of the command deck, her mind racing with the implications of what she had just learned. The Ascendants, who had watched humanity for so long, were now warning her about something even more dangerous than the Vithrax. But who were these ancient powers, and what did they want with humanity? As the crew continued their preparations, Juno couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the edge of something far greater than they had anticipated. The Vithrax had been the first to feel humanity's wrath, but they wouldn't be the last. The galaxy was waking up to the fact that humanity had returned, and soon. Every empire in the stars would have to reckon with that truth. Meanwhile, back on the Vithrax flagship, Captain Zarek was seething with rage. The communication from the Ascendants had struck a nerve. For centuries, the Vithrax had ruled with an iron fist, their empire growing stronger with every conquest. They had never feared anything or anyone until now. We cannot let this human warship continue, Zarek growled, his voice filled with venom. We will strike back. We will show them that the Vithrax are not to be challenged. His officers nodded in agreement, But there was an uneasy silence in the room. The human warship had proven to be far more than they had expected. Zarek had to admit that the humans were no longer the weak species they had thought them to be. They'd given us a glimpse of their power, Captain, one of his officers said cautiously. But the Ascendants have spoken. We need to think carefully. If we push them too far, we may awaken something we cannot control. Zarek slammed his fist against the command chair. Then we will face it. I will not let this human ship defy us any longer. We will destroy them. Back on the human warship. Juno stood in front of a large display screen, staring at the map of the galaxy. The Vithraks were regrouping, and they were not the only ones watching. The Ascendants had made their intentions clear. They were not allies, but they were not enemies either. But their warning had opened a new chapter in the galaxy's uncertain future. Who else had been watching humanity? Who else would come out of the shadows now? Juno knew that the battle had only just begun. There were greater challenges ahead, and this was merely the beginning of a war that would span the stars. But humanity was no longer the lost race they once were. They had returned, and with that return, they were ready to take on whatever came. Next, alien resistance. The message from the Ascendants lingered in Juno's mind like an unspoken threat, casting a shadow over every decision she made. The galaxy was no longer just a place of conquest. It was now a chessboard, and humanity had made its first move. Yet as the warship drifted deeper into enemy space, the challenges only grew. The Vithraks, though beaten, were far from finished. And now humanity's presence was stirring something older, something more dangerous in the galaxy than even the Ascendants. The silent hum of the human warship's engines filled the bridge as Juno stood at the helm, contemplating their next course of action. The Vithraks were regrouping, but there was another problem. Other alien factions, sensing the shift in power, were beginning to take notice. Humanity's sudden appearance had disrupted the delicate balance of the galaxy, and some factions were not content to sit idle and wait. Captain Iris, the ship's AI, interjected, its voice cutting through Juno's thoughts. I have detected multiple unidentified ships on an intercept course. They're cloaked, perhaps an attempt to remain hidden. Juno's grip tightened. On the command chair, it was no surprise that others would come for them. The galaxy had never been kind to the weak, and humanity was a species that had survived by their wits, not their numbers. She had been prepared for this. What are they, Eris? Can you get a reading on them? Negachivi, Eris responded. I cannot pinpoint their origins. They are well outside the known territories and use technology that doesn't match any known fleet. They are not Vithraks. Juno turned to her crew, her eyes narrowing with focus. Prepare for evasive maneuvers. Whatever they are, we'll be ready. The unknown ships, dark and silent, their shapes barely visible against the expanse of space, moved closer. The crew of the Titaness remained calm, but a palpable sense of tension filled the air. The unknown ships were no longer in hiding. They were closing in, and they had no intention of retreating. These were not the Vithraks, nor were they any of the usual alien races humanity had encountered. Captain, the communications officer reported, the ships are hailing us. They're demanding we stop our advance. Juno's eyes flicked to the tactical display. The unknown ships were positioned around them, a net closing in. But there was something unusual about their formation. They weren't aiming to destroy, they were positioning themselves, almost as if they were herding the human ship toward. A trap. Put it through, Juno ordered, her voice steady, but her mind racing. This was the moment they had been waiting for. Another player had entered the game. The screen flickered to life, and for the first time, Juno saw the face of the mysterious alien race. The being that appeared on the screen was unlike anything she had ever seen. Tall and slender, with skin that shimmered like starlight and eyes that glowed faintly. The creature looked as though it had been crafted from the very fabric of the galaxy itself. "We are the Ferks." The alien's voice resonated through the bridge, rich and smooth like a melody, but heavy with authority. "You are trespassing in the territories of the Ancient Ones. You have defied the laws that govern the galaxy." Heart skipped a beat. The Ferks, she had heard rumors of them, whispers of a race so old, so powerful, that their very presence could alter the fate of entire star systems. Few knew anything concrete about them, except that they were not to be trifled with. The Ascendants had warned her, and now it seemed humanity had stumbled into a confrontation with yet another ancient force. "We do not seek your territory," Juno responded, her voice calm, betraying none of the tension she felt. "We seek only our place in this galaxy. We are not your enemies." The Ferks leader's gaze deepened. "You are mistaken, human. You are not the first species to seek a place in the galaxy, but you may very well be the last. You have awoken forces that have lain dormant for eons. You have challenged the balance." Juno stood tall, her resolve unwavering. "Then we will make a new balance. We do not fear you." The Ferks leader let out a low chuckle, but there was no humor in it. "You will learn. You have already made your first mistake, and the consequences will be dire." Before Juno could respond, the transmission cut off. The Ferks ships closed in, their formation tightening around the tightness. They were surrounded. Captain Aris reported, "I'm detecting a massive energy buildup from the Ferks ships. They are preparing to fire." "Brace for impact," Juno ordered, turning to her crew. She knew that this battle would be unlike any they had fought before. The Ferks were ancient, they were powerful, and now they were here to test humanity's resolve. The first blast came without warning, wave of energy so intense that the ship shuddered under the force. The Titaness rocked, and alarms blared throughout the bridge. Systems flickered, but the shields held, barely. The energy from the Ferks had been aimed at the core of the ship, attempting to disable them in one strike. "Shields holding at 40%, the tactical officer reported. "We need to retaliate, Captain, or we'll be sitting ducks." Juno's mind raced. This was no longer just about survival. This was about making a statement. The Ferks wanted to test humanity, but Juno was not about to let them succeed. "Return fire," Juno ordered. "Target their lead ship. We'll show them that humanity isn't easily beaten." The Titaness weapons powered up, its energy beams striking the lead Ferks ship. The impact sent shockwaves through the alien vessels. Shields, but the Ferks returned fire with equal force, sending a pulse of energy that ripped through the Titaness defenses. "We can't take much more of this," the officer warned. "The hull integrity is weakening." Juno clenched her jaw. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers. We need to buy time until we can retaliate. We won't give up, not now." The battle raged, but Juno knew that the Ferks had just revealed their hand. They were testing humanity, and they wouldn't stop until they knew humanity's true strength. Outside, in the cold vastness of space, the battle between the Titaness and the Ferks fleet intensified. What had started as a simple engagement was now a test of wills. The Ferks had underestimated humanity's resilience. They had thought humanity weak, a race lost to time. But they had awoken a force that could no longer be ignored, and as the warship's engines hummed with power, As humanity's greatest weapon powered up for its next strike, one thing became clear. This battle was just the beginning. Asterisk, the final countdown. The battle in space had now turned into a relentless war of attrition. The once untouchable Ferks, having expected an easy victory over the humans, were now locked in a fierce struggle. The human warship, the Titaness, though damaged, held firm under the barrage of the Ferks' unimaginable firepower. The crew aboard the Titaness was exhausted but unbroken. For the first time in centuries, humanity's greatest weapon, its unyielding spirit, was on full display. Juno Walker stood at the helm, her face illuminated by the flickering displays around her. Her thoughts raced as she watched the Ferks ships encircle them, their energy pulses tearing through the hull of the ship, while the crew fought tirelessly to keep the systems online. She could feel the pressure mounting, the weight of the mission heavier than ever. "Captain, we've lost our long-range communication systems. The Ferks have jammed all frequencies," the communications officer reported. His voice was steady, but his pale face betrayed his concern. "Keep trying," Juno replied, her voice calm but tinged with an undercurrent of urgency. "We need to reach the rest of the fleet. If we can't get reinforcements, we'll have to make our stand here." Eris, the ship's AI, spoke up, cutting through the tension with its cool, digital voice. "Captain, the Ferks are preparing another massive strike. Their weapons are focused on our main reactor. If they hit us again, it could cause a catastrophic breach." Juno's mind raced her thoughts, churning. The Ferks were closing in, and their power was overwhelming. Her ship was one of the few left in the galaxy with any chance of standing up to the ancient forces, but even it was beginning to show signs of wear. The Titaness was strong, but it could only take so much. She had to think fast. "We need to stop them from hitting the reactor," she muttered, mostly to herself. "Activate the overload shield. Focus all energy on reinforcing our defenses. I'll give them one last chance to back off, but if they don't," Eris interrupted, "we'll have no choice but to engage in full offensive mode." Heart skipped a beat. If the Ferks didn't respond to her last attempt at diplomacy, they would have no choice but to destroy them. Not only would it be a heavy cost for the Titaness, but it would signal to the galaxy that humanity had come to fight not just to survive, but to shape its destiny. "Prepare all weapon systems," Juno commanded. "We won't let them destroy us without a fight." Outside the Titaness, the Ferks ships continued their relentless assault. Their massive, shimmering vessels surrounded the human warship like predators closing in on their prey. Despite their ancient technology, they were not invincible. The Vithraks and other empires had fallen to humanity's power, but the Ferks were different. They were older, wiser, and far more calculating. Yet even they had not anticipated the sheer determination that humanity would bring to this fight. Inside the Ferks flagship, Commander Zalrith observed the unfolding battle with a sense of growing frustration. The human warship had proven more resilient than he had expected. Every time they struck, it absorbed the blows, and though it was visibly damaged, it refused to give in. "Why do they not break?" Zalrith muttered to himself. This is not how it was supposed to go." His second in command, a tall and angular figure named Tiskin, approached him. "Commander, the human warship is pushing back. Their resilience is unlike anything we've encountered. Should we send in more reinforcements?" Zalrith shook his head. "No. We cannot waste any more resources on this. We must deal with them now, or we will lose everything. Initiate the final strike. If the human warship survives this, we will have to rethink our strategy entirely. Teskin hesitated, but nodded. Understood, Commander. Back aboard the Titanus, the tension had reached its peak. Juno stood before her crew, every eye on her as the ship continued to rock under the Ferk's bombardment. Their shields were holding, but only just. The energy from their weapons was slowly eating away at the ship's integrity. It would only be a matter of time before the reactor became the target of the final devastating strike. "We have one last chance," Juno said, her voice steady, but there was a fire in her eyes. "Prepared to activate the overload shield. Aim for their flagship, full power." "Captain, are you sure?" the weapons officer asked, his voice faltering. "We've never attempted an overload at this scale. It could cripple us entirely." Juno looked at him, her face unreadable. "If we don't do this, they will. And then there will be no more Titanus, no more humanity." The weapons officer nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. The crew, though battered, had rallied behind her. This wasn't just about surviving. It was about sending a message. Humanity had come to reclaim what was theirs, and they would not go down without a fight. Suddenly, the Ferk's flagship powered up its weapons for a final strike. The Titanus shuddered as the energy beams lanced toward it, the intensity of the blast enough to break the ship's outer hull. "Activate overload shield," Juno shouted, her heart pounding in her chest. In a matter of seconds, the ship's energy reserves surged, a pulse of power running through the Titanus as its weapon systems charged to their maximum. The human warship aimed its cannons at the Ferk's flagship, unleashing a barrage of energy so powerful that the stars themselves seemed to flicker. The concentrated fire tore through the Ferk's ship's defenses, cracking its shields and sending shockwaves through the hull. The Ferk's flagship struggled to hold its position, but the power of the Titanus was overwhelming. With a final, deafening blast, the flagship exploded into a massive burst of energy, its remnants scattering across the void. "Direct hit," the tactical officer said, his voice filled with awe. "The Ferk's flagship is destroyed." The crew of the Titanus erupted into cheers, but Juno remained focused. She had known that the battle wouldn't be over with this victory. The Ferks had been powerful, but they were not the only force in the galaxy. "Prepare for the next wave," she said, turning toward her officers. "The galaxy is watching, and humanity is here to stay." The battle had been won, but humanity's real challenge was only just beginning. The Ferks had been a major force, but they were not the only ancient power lurking in the shadows. As the Titanus drifted into the aftermath of battle, Juno knew that this victory would send ripples across the galaxy. It would not be long before the other empires took notice. Humanity had proven its power. But now, the true test of their strength would come not from the enemies they faced, but from the allies they would need to forge a new future, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The new era, the void of space, was silent once again, but the silence carried with it the weight of an unprecedented shift in the galaxy. The Ferk's flagship lay in ruins, its once unbreakable form now scattered in pieces, drifting aimlessly through the cold expanse. The Titanus floated amidst the debris, its hull scarred but unbowed. The crew, though exhausted, shared a moment of quiet triumph. They had faced down one of the galaxy's most ancient and feared powers. They had won. Yet, as Juno Walker stood on the bridge, watching the stars stretch out before her, she knew this was not the end. The battle had been fierce, but it was only the beginning of something far greater. Captain Ares spoke, its voice cutting through the silence. The Firk's fleet is in disarray. Their forces are retreating, but the damage to their command structure is significant. They have lost control. Juno nodded, her eyes sharp, but they won't stop. The Firks are not the only ones watching. There are others, older forces that will not take kindly to humanity's return. We've made our mark, but now we need to prepare for what's coming next. Her crew, though proud of their victory, knew the truth of her words. The Firks were only the first step. Now the galaxy was awake, and humanity was no longer a myth, it was a force, a new player in the grand cosmic game. But with that power came responsibility, and more importantly, threats. Send a message to the rest of the fleet, Juno ordered. It's time for the galaxy to understand. Humanity is back, and we will not be silenced again. Elsewhere, deep within the dark corners of the galaxy, the remaining alien empires were already stirring. The news of the Firks' defeat spread quickly, carried through the cosmos like wildfire. The Kratha, the Vithrax, the Cernoxych Empire watched from the shadows, each one weighing their options. The galaxy that had once been dominated by the strongest was now teetering on the edge of a new order. An order where humanity would not be pushed aside in the heart of the Vithrax Empire. Captain Zorik sat in his command center, watching the footage of the battle between the Titanus and the Firks. His expression was grim, his mind racing with the implications of what had just happened. The Vithrax had been humbled before humanity's might, but the Firks were not their only challenge. The galaxy was vast, and there were powers beyond anything the Vithrax had ever known. Prepare the fleet, Zorik said, his voice low. Humanity has awakened, and we will need allies if we are to face them. Back aboard the Titanus, Juno was deep in thought. Her eyes were fixed on the holographic map of the galaxy that hung before her. The Vithrax, though defeated in their initial encounter, were still a formidable force. And now, the Firks, though broken, still had pockets of resistance. The galaxy was far from stable. Humanity had proven itself in battle, but it was not just power they needed. Net was unity. We need to forge alliances, Juno said, turning to her crew. Humanity cannot stand alone forever. We've made our mark, but we will need the strength of others to take on what lies ahead. Her strategic officer, a sharp-minded individual named Elias, spoke up. I've been studying the data from the Firks flagship. There's more to their retreat than we've realized. They've left behind a messenger, cryptic warning to the other empires. Someone or something is coming. Something older than even the Firks. It's only a matter of time before we face it. Juno's brow furrowed. What kind of threat? Elias hesitated, his eyes flicking to the data on the screen. It's unclear, but the message spoke of a cosmic reckoning. The didn't just want to control space, they were guarding it from something much worse. Juno stood tall, her mind racing. The galaxy was full of surprises, but this was no ordinary warning. Something was coming, and it was beyond the Firks or even the Vithrax. The human warship had faced down ancient powers, but the galaxy's greatest test was still ahead. Hours later, as the Titanus moved deeper into alien territory, Juno gathered her most trusted officers for a briefing. They were preparing to send emissaries to the alien factions they had encountered, seeking to form alliances. But the threat Elias had discovered weighed heavily on her mind. They were preparing for war, but not the kind they had expected. We've sent out diplomatic channels to the Vithrax, the Kratha, and the Cernox, Juno began, addressing her crew. But I want you all to be clear, this isn't just about defending humanity. We must lead. We must be ready to take the fight to whatever is coming, because the galaxy is no longer what it was. Captain, what if the other empires resist? What if they don't see us as allies? One of her officers asked. Juno's eyes locked onto theirs. Then we show them. We've already proven our strength, but now we need to prove our purpose. Humanity is here to stay, and if they want to survive, they'll have to stand with us. The room fell silent as the weight of her words settled in. They weren't just fighting to survive anymore. Humanity had returned not just as conquerors, but as leaders, ready to carve a new path through the galaxy. And that path would not be easy. The ancient powers, the cosmic reckoning Elias had spoken of, were still out there. The Firks had only been the beginning, but Juno knew one thing for certain: humanity had always fought to survive. Now they would fight to lead. As the Titaness moved forward, the crew braced themselves for the unknown. The galaxy was no longer divided into empires, it was divided into the strong and the weak. The ones who would fight for a new future, and those who would be left behind. Humanity had made its stand, and the galaxy was watching. But the final battle, the one that would shape the galaxy's fate forever, was still ahead. And as Juno stood on the bridge, gazing out into the stars, she knew that the coming days would decide everything. The galaxy was changing, and humanity was ready to lead.